Buster!
I think he needs glasses.
See, it's me. It's literally me. Literally. You know me. I gotta record the video. I know, you wanna be the star of it. I know, you will be. Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am obviously not in New York right now, but in this video I want to talk about New York and discuss the pros and cons of moving to the city in your 20s. That's what I did, and this video, in my vision, is what I would like to see last year when I was still contemplating whether I want to move to New York or not. Let me just make you more stable. A few of my friends are thinking of moving to the city. I get questions on my Instagram quite often, and I just made a list of pros and cons, and I'm gonna quickly go through them. A little bit of context: I am 23 years old and I work remotely, so I don't have the office experience in New York to comment on. I lived in Williamsburg in Brooklyn. I absolutely love the area. It's one of my favorite neighborhoods in the city. I've lived in 7 other cities around the world, so a lot of my experience will be like comparing New York to places like San Francisco or Seoul or Buenos Aires or Moscow. I can't not compare, pretty much. A common sense disclaimer: I am just one person, my opinions are subjective, you do you. This is just what I think is significant for anybody to make a more informed decision on moving to the city or not. Respectfully. Let's start with the pros. Number one, and the most obvious one, is that New York is a very big city and there's lots to do. There's good food, there are amazing museums, galleries, cafes, clubs, bars, whatever you're interested in. It's easy to find, it's very diverse in activities and entertainment, so that's wonderful. You will never get bored. However, in my opinion, there are other big, wonderful cities around the world that have just as much to offer as New York, maybe less, maybe more, that are much more comfortable to live in. For instance, London or Berlin. So that pro on its own, I don't think it's that strong. Another thing I love about New York is that there are people of diverse backgrounds, occupations. The city really is a melting pot. I love that when I walk down the street, I will hear French, Italian, Spanish, I will hear Bulgarian, languages that I don't even recognize. I love that diversity and how international the city is. It's truly a cosmopolitan city. It's fun to learn from people, and you literally never know who you're gonna meet, how the conversation will go, and that's lovely. There's like a big sense of novelty around that. Another pro that I keep hearing about New York is that it has a great dating scene. There's so many people. You can meet randomly on the street, you can meet on dating apps. There's a lot of opportunity for it. However, at the same time, as a con, what I keep hearing from people is that they hate dating in New York, and that there's a lot of like ghosting and no commitment, and some people I know got hurt a lot. So I don't know about that one, just thought I'd throw it in because it does seem important. Another great thing about New York, and one of the most important reasons why I chose to move there, is that you don't need a car to get around the city. Some neighborhoods are very walkable, but overall you can go around with public transport, and that's a rare thing for an American city. Now the con that comes with that, you know, I'm making this balanced. I gotta give you like the full picture perspective. As efficient and extensive as the subway in New York is, it makes me feel so damn unsafe, and it's also not nice at all. Now, I'm very spoiled in this specific aspect because I grew up in Moscow, and in Moscow the subway, it's like a art museum. Like most stations you go into, they're made of marble and they're clean and they're gorgeous. But then you have the subway system in Seoul that's also really clean and nice, and you have the subway system in London that is very old and makes you feel a little bit claustrophobic, but at least you feel safe. When I walk into the subway in New York, I feel a little anxious, and it just looks like it's from the post-apocalyptic world. Another pro of living in New York is that it's really easy to romanticize the city if you want to, particularly because a lot of my favorite films, your favorite films, they were filmed there. When I went to the Washington Square Park, I just felt this like, because that's where Rory saw Jess and Gilmore Girls on that bench, and I was on that bench or near it, and I just felt so close to the characters that, you know, I loved. I would say when I was growing up, but I actually watched Gilmore Girls like last year, so. But in general, because of all the romantic comedies and great films that were produced in the city, it's really easy to walk down the street and be like, oh my god, that's here. Every single time I look at the Empire State Building, I think about the King Kong, you know, and watching that movie when I was, I don't know, 10, thinking that it was, you know, in a different reality, in a different world, yet here I am crossing the street on my way to CVS, and it's there. That's quite a cool feeling. You just feel like you're in a different dimension. Another pro of living in New York, for me personally, is that the architecture is really beautiful and it really inspires me. In comparison to a lot of other American cities, New York is very old, and you get to walk around and see buildings that were there, you know, for 100 years, and I just really appreciate walking around the Upper East Side or West Village or Soho, just looking at these cream old buildings, and just brings me great delight. Another pro of living in New York, and it's really hard to describe, is the energy on Manhattan. Now, as I told you, I lived in Brooklyn, so it would take me like crossing the Williamsburg Bridge to get into Manhattan, and that would take like 15-20 minutes by subway. Every single time I would step onto Lower Manhattan, something just shifted in me. I felt the energy was different. I would just feel so elated, uplifted, and walking down the street, my power would just come back to me. I don't know what it is, probably the fact that millions and millions of people left their mark in the city just makes you want to do things, you know. I was just walking down the street listening to my music in my headphones, and I'm like, okay, I got this. Another pro of being in New York is, in my opinion, whatever you think about the city, in spring, when the city's blooming, you see white, pink flowers everywhere, there's like this fresh air, it's impossible not to fall in love in the city. That's what I think. When like the sun peeks through, the city comes to life. You cannot help come to life with it, especially if you spend the winter there. Now, let's move on to cons, shall we? Oh, wait. Another pro I forgot to add is the sense of community that you experience when you live in New York. In the neighborhood I lived, there was a specific bodega, or like a kiosk or corner shop, where I would get my bagels. I had the perfect bagel recipe down, and the same guy would make me a bagel every single day, most days. And I don't know his name, but we interacted all the time. I have the map of my favorite coffee shops that I would go to all the time, and there were the same baristas there. The Italian bakery where I would always get the cheesecake. Seeing the same faces over and over again, and knowing that those are small businesses, that just added some comfort that I guess not all big cities have. Actually, I felt it everywhere I lived. But it's wonderful that New York has that too. Okay, now I'm ready to move on to my cons list. Number one, and I think this matters the absolute least, is that the weather is really freaking unpredictable in New York. I've never been in a place where one day it's like freezing cold, lots of snow, and the next day it's plus 22 degrees Celsius and sunny, and then the next day it's cold again. It was hard to tell how to dress. It was hard to tell when to like, when does it get better. In winter, surprisingly, there's not much snow, and whenever there is a little bit of snow, the whole city goes into like this snow emergency. There's nobody outside, places closed down, and I'm just walking confused because it's just this much snow. And then in the summer, when it gets warmer, you feel the heat so much more because it's humid, and all the trash that's sitting in the streets, it becomes more fragrant as well, just as the subway. Something to keep in mind. Another con for me is that New York is really freaking loud. Depends on the neighborhood. If you live in the Upper West Side, or if you live maybe somewhere in West Village or some other neighborhoods, you will not notice it as much. But especially as the warm weather came around, more people will be outside, there will be more like parties and stuff. And under my street, I would be woken up at night by someone arguing. Even though I lived on the 5th floor, if someone's arguing downstairs, I will hear it and I will wake up. If there's like cars racing by very loudly, I would wake up. If there's bars, you know, all that good stuff, it can be very uncomfortable if you're a sensitive sleeper. It's also very loud in general, and that could be fun you know, there's someone playing music on the subway or on the bus when you're riding it. Like, people talk very loudly, there's all this like bustle and things are happening. It's really quite loud. Some people feed off of that energy and they feel really good in it. I realized that for me personally, I think I'm a bit too sensitive for that, but just, yeah, know yourself. Whatever suits you. Next con of moving to New York City as a 20-something. Obviously, probably what everybody mentions is that it costs a lot to live here. There. I'm not there right now, but it costs a lot to live in New York. Unless you're already very successful and financially well off, moving to New York, it's not just like, oh, I'm just gonna change my location. It is a financial investment that will probably eat at your savings. And I hear a lot of people like justify that by all the opportunities they get to experience in the city and the lifestyle. Pretty much all the pros I've talked about as well. I don't think it's worth it financially if you can't afford it. I have a friend who, instead of moving to New York after graduation, moved to Richmond, Virginia, which is a big city comparatively, but it's cozy and there's a lot of nature there, and she had like a walking buddy with her, and she was like part of, you know, biking societies, and she would, you know, go running in the woods that were 5 minutes away from her house, and she could actually rent a whole house instead of a room. So I would just say that unless New York is the city that you really want to be in, it's good to consider all options. For me personally, I'm really happy that I got to live in New York, and I think it was worth it for me, just because I can like take it off my list, and in 5 years, wherever I'm living, if I'm not happy there and I'm like thinking, oh, I had that opportunity to live in New York and I never took it, what if that could be the best thing for me? I kind of saved myself the potential future regrets by doing this now. I'm really happy for that, and it was worth it for me. Another aspect of living in New York that I didn't enjoy, and to me I think it's so freaking important, I would put it on top of my list actually, is that New York is not just dirty, it's anti-sanitary. I want to emphasize how important it is, because when I heard people tell me like, oh, New York is so dirty, I just completely dismissed it. I was like, you know, I was there as a tourist, I liked it, I didn't think it was that dirty, but when you actually live there, it's not like, you know, Paris dirty or Berlin dirty, it's anti-sanitary. Let me give you specific examples. There are rats. They are rats. If you're anywhere, especially in East Village, there's so many of them, it's scary to walk at night. The city is infested with rats. Everybody knows it, people make jokes about it, but if you really think about the issue, it's not funny, because rats carry diseases, and they're dead rats, they're rats that are crushed by cars. It's just too many of them, and there is not like cute ratatouille rats. I don't even understand why I'm explaining it so much. You cohabitating a city with rats. I think there are like, what, 2 million of them in the city? Another thing I would mention is that all the trash from the businesses, from the residential buildings, is all in the streets in piles. It's actually kind of cute in winter when it did snow and you're just like walking down the streets and all these little, actually not little, all these big trash bags have like snow hats on them. But other than that, not so cute. Especially, as I said, in the summer, it just starts smelling really bad. Another thing is that dogs and people use the pavements as a toilet. I have seen people poop in the streets. It's just something to be aware of, whether you can tolerate that or not. Another aspect of living in New York that I think you should be aware of is obviously the lack of nature. And people would say that, oh, but we have the Central Park, and it is a really nice, huge, beautiful park. But unless you live like really close, it's like a 30-40 minute subway ride to get there, and on most days you wouldn't have the energy to like, oh, I'm gonna commute for like an hour and a half to spend 20 minutes walking in the park. It's just not, it's not very rational. And you could definitely rent a car, take the train out of the city, go somewhere. I kind of took it more radically, went to the Midwest to enjoy some grass. But it's not something that's very easy to infuse in like daily life. The last con I'm gonna mention in this video is that, in my opinion, and the opinion of the friends that I've talked to about this, living in New York is very aspirational. Specifically, it's having low standards for the quality of living because you're waiting for something better to come along and, you know, like go up that career ladder or become more successful so you can afford more better things, which is very inspirational and aspirational at the same time. Like living in a tiny space, paying a lot of money for that rent, living with a lot of roommates, commuting for a long time, just throw in as many aspects as you can think of so that in a few years you get to have a nice life. And that's, I feel like, it's not just about New York. Sorry, you keep shaking. I don't think it's just about New York. I think it's just like some aspect of this like American dream. I just think that there are places where you can have those ambitions and work towards your big dreams and goals while enjoying life more without necessarily compromising on life quality and mental well-being. For instance, one of my friends who agrees with me that New York is very aspirational, she decided to move to Portugal and live in Lisbon, where she doesn't have to make those compromises. Again, to each their own. The last thing I'm gonna say about my impressions of New York, and this one is just neutral, it's not positive, not negative, it's just there. I just noticed that New Yorkers are very proud to be New Yorkers. You know, some conversations I've been in, it's like, you're not a New Yorker. No, I was born in New York, but you didn't live in New York until you were like 25. But I was born here and then my parents moved away, so I am a New Yorker. I don't know, it's just... There must be some sense of pride that comes out of being part of the city and its history and all its amazing inhabitants. But in the end of the day, it's just a city. And I think I fell for a lot of descriptions of New York, a lot of like this mythology almost that's spread about New York around the world. And you may not get it, maybe if you're American, but for me, as a Russian individual who grew up watching American movies, like the first city that comes to mind when people in a lot of third world countries think about, when they think about America, is New York. You know, it's the ideal, the culmination of all great things about the US. And I think it is a bit over-romanticized and oversold, at least abroad. Thank you for watching this video. I hope it was insightful. I really tried my best to make a well-rounded picture of the city. And whether you decide to move to New York or go elsewhere, I wish you the best of luck in the new chapter of your life. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and also follow me on Instagram at DenariaXYZ. I will probably see you in New York in the next video, and until then, I'm wishing you a wonderful, fantastic, the best time, because you deserve it. Mwah. Bye.